Or with Last Second Sports. Thank you so much for tapping in with me on this Friday evening. I hope you're ready to have a good weekend, have a blessed weekend. And we are inching closer and closer to some actual football things happening again. Next week, the combine, we're going to hear from John Lynch. We're going to see some of these rookies go out and perform. And then we're not too far away from free agency. I cannot wait. Cannot wait. But with that being said, I had to look back on this last season and assess things again. How close are the 49ers truly to breaking through and getting back to where they want to be, which is essentially the Super Bowl, trying to win a Super Bowl? They got to get to the playoffs first, but we're going to talk about it. PFF's done a great job this offseason. I'm not the biggest fan of PFF as far as some of their grades game to game, but I do think that over the course of the season, they do a good job of having a pulse grade wise on how players did for the most part. I love some of their advanced analytics, and they've done a great job this offseason with putting together some of their lists. And they put together their list of their top 100 players. They call it their top 101, actually. They did 101 players, much like the NFL does their top 100 players, except for, that one's more players voting on it, what have you. You can have some crazy things happen there. A lot of guys vote for their friends, what have you. But this top 101 list, I had to go through it, see how many 49ers were on there. And then I wanted to compare that to how many of teams in the top four, essentially. We had what? The Eagles, the Commanders, the Lions, and the Rams were the final four in the NFC. So how many did those teams have, right? Like that was a big question. And then I wanted to know how many in the division. How many top 100 players did each division foe have? I want to see how close the 49ers truly are, because it does feel like the 49ers still have some good talent, but a lot of that talent wasn't top tier last year. For example, if I go to 2023, Brock Purdy would have been in the top 100 list. Brandon Ayuk would have been in the top 100 list. CMC would have been in the top 100 list. Dre Greenlaw. Those guys no longer were there this year. They fell out either due to injury or, in Brock's case, he didn't have the stacked team around him. So he took a back step and there was just a lot of things happening. But do the 49ers still have some elite talent? And I think they do. I think this exercise shows that they definitely do. So I'm going to give you the players that ended up in the top 101 for PFF based off their grading system this last season. And the 49ers had 5 players make that. And I think you'd be surprised at least one of them here. Player number 100 on the list was Dominic Pooney. Dominic Pooney had a really good rookie season. And what's interesting about Dominic Pooney, we talked last night, for those that watch 49ers daily on Thursday night, we talked last night about John Feliciano and how he retired. Let's not forget that really Feliciano was supposed to be the starting right guard. Then, after Feliciano, it was supposed to be Burford. Dominic Pooney came out of nowhere, out of necessity, and then carved his way onto this starting lineup and never looked back. John Feliciano had the injury early to his knee, was basically unable to participate in the practices. Then Burford came in. Burford was actually looking really good early on in camp, and then he breaks his hand. So here comes Dominic Pooney, forced into the starting lineup, and he clearly was the best guard on the roster, right or left guard. Played really good football. I think he did sputter out a little bit towards the end of the season. A lot of people don't want to talk about that, but to me, I don't think it's because of a lack of talent or he stopped figuring out how to play in this league. I think he was a rookie, and a lot of rookie players hit that rookie wall, and I think that's what happened to Dominic Pooney. Super happy to see that he was still in the top 101, barely eked in at spot 100. But I think that's really cool for Dominic Pooney, and I think the sky's the limit for him. I really think he can be a good player in this league. And remember, they got him in round 3. Trent Williams, although we know he didn't play a full season, he was still number 98 on this list. Trent Williams, as long as he's in this league and can put up 10 or so games, he's always going to make this list. I mean, he's just a really good player, a Hall of Fame player. He's no longer the best left tackle in the game. I think that we can say, but he's still upper echelon. He's still elite in this league. It's really a matter of, can he make it through the season healthy? That's the biggest thing. But when he is playing, we know he's a top 100 player. He made the list at 98. Fred Warner started out the season so hot. My gosh, I remember the first few games, he was interceptions and fumble recoveries and forced fumbles, and he was just all over the field. And then we come to find out he broke his ankle. He was playing on a broken ankle, and the numbers started to go down a little bit. There was at one point he had given up 39 straight receptions or something. Just wasn't himself, and it was clear. And then it came out, oh, of course, he's playing on a broken ankle. Like, no wonder Fred Warner doesn't look like Fred Warner when he looked like he was on his way to potentially putting in a bid for Defensive Player of the Year the first 4 or 5 games of the season. And then it was just right off a cliff. Injury, we know, but still, number 57 on this list, I think that's deserved. This next player gets a lot of criticism from the fan base, and I understand why. He got paid a lot of money, still more money than any defensive player in the league. I think that's frustrating for some people. In fact, we're going to talk about this towards the end of the show. It's not just frustrating for fans. It seems like it's frustrating for the San Francisco 49ers front office as well. But Nick Bosa was still number 35 on this list. And the, you know, the moment that sold me, not that I needed to be sold on how good Nick Bosa is, but I do think that people believe that he's not as good as he is because the sack numbers aren't there. There's a lot of things that factor into sack numbers. There is. It kind of reminds me of touchdowns for like a receiver. Julio Jones is a great example of this. He went so many years where he couldn't even get double digit touchdowns, but he was still upper echelon in the league and everybody knew it. Sack numbers don't tell the whole story. There's a lot more to play in the position. Sack numbers are just a snapshot. They're the sexy number that everybody looks at. But against Seattle, when they lost that second time around against the Seahawks, Bosa left that game. And the moment he left it, literally the next play forward through the end of the game, Geno Smith had the most confidence I've ever seen him play with. It was absolutely incredible. Geno Smith against the 49ers, he looks disappointed after every play. He looks scared to play the 49ers. Little did I know, it's just Nick Bosa. The moment Nick Bosa leaves, he had the most confident I've ever seen him play against the 49ers. It was unbelievable. I think that tells you the impact that Nick Bosa had. And then, Nick Bosa missed a few more games, what have you, was in and out of the lineup. His impact is very, very clear. Nick Bosa was number 35 on the list. And then the player that rated the highest on the list, deservedly so, somehow continues to play at an extremely high level, even though he's on the other side of 30. George Kittle. My gosh. I mean, I've been talking about for 3 years how George Kittle is like, I don't know, man. Is he really going to play that much longer? He's plays a lot like Rob Gronkowski, and we saw Rob retire and then come back and play a couple seasons and retire again. Not everybody does what Kelsey did or Shannon Sharp or some of these guys where they play into their mid-30s. The way he plays football, it's such a physical style. It is so impressive to watch George Kittle continue to play at an elite level at this juncture in his career. So shout out to George Kittle. He was number 13 on the list. He was the highest rated 49er. So that's not where the conversation stops. So I'm going to give you a recap real quick about the 49ers. 49ers had 5 total players on the top 101 list for PFF. They had 2 in the top 50, 0 in the top 10, and out of those players, 0 are free agents. Okay. So then, of course, naturally, I look at the final 4 teams, and Two of them, the 49ers actually on paper have more talent than. Two of them, not so much. The Philadelphia Eagles had 11 total players on this list, six of them in the top 50. So they had one more player in the top 50 than the 49ers had total players on this list, period. And then two of them are in the top 10. Now, interestingly enough, two of the players on their list are free agents. So Milton Williams, Zach Bond, they're both free agents. I want to say that Milton Williams ranked like 90th overall and Zach Bond was like 37th or something. So they're not losing top 10 guys, but they're definitely potentially could be losing some pretty good players here. But they're not void of talent. Even if they lost them both, they have 9 guys still on this list, 2 of them in the top 10, and that's pretty impressive, and they'd still have 5 in the top 50. That's a good team. The Detroit Lions, they had 9 players on this list, which is crazy for a team that had as many injuries as they had, because there are some guys that were injured that could have potentially made the list if they had stayed healthy this season. So they had 9 players on this list, 5 in the top 50, which is the total amount of 49ers had period in the top 50. And they had 0 in the top 10 though. And one of those players is a free agent. So we'll see what that looks like for the Detroit Lions. But those two teams, those rosters right now, supremely talented. But this is where a major drop off happens. When we get to the Washington Commanders, who made it to the NFC Championship, they only had 3 total players on this list, 2 of them in the top 50. So the 49ers had 5, the Commanders had 3. They both had 2 in the top 50. Neither had any in the top 10. And one of those players for the Commanders, Bobby Wagner, is a free agent this year. They're not supremely talented. The Rams, who were this close, actually, believe it or not, this is what's crazy about the Rams. They were this close to beating the Eagles, coming back against the Eagles. Then the Eagles went on to play the Commanders, mopped them, went on to play the Chiefs, mopped them. The Rams were technically, I mean, just by the way that they played the champions, the second best team in the NFC. They just got beat around early. They only had 2 total players in the top 100. Now, both of them were in the top 50. None were in the top 10, and none of those guys are free agents, but they only had 2. The 49ers had 5. And then the Seahawks, the reason I'm bringing the Seahawks in is because now we're looking at division. You got to win your division. Seahawks had 3 total on this list, 1 in the top 50 and none in the top 10. None of them are free agents this offseason. And then the Cardinals also had 2 on this list, none in the top 50, none in the top 10, and none of those guys are free agents. So here's what I took from this exercise. The San Francisco 49ers still have a lot of talent, because there are 3 players that I can think of off the top of my head that I think next year might make this list. And I'm not even going to mention CMC or Ayuk, depending on when Ayuk comes back or how good CMC looks. Now he's 29, we'll see, but I'm not even going to mention him. He was the offensive player of the year. He was number 1 arguably on this list 2 years ago. I'm not even going to mention him. I still have 3 players that I think can make this list next year. Now, one of them they have to sign, Dre Greenlaw. If Dre Greenlaw is back on this team, I think he can make this list. But we don't know for sure if he's going to make it back and be signed by the 49ers. But would anybody be shocked if Diamador Lenore made this list next year? And Diamador Lenore carries himself with such a swagger. He can play inside, he can play out. He's a good tackler, he's a good blitzer. He's good in man, he's good in, I mean, he does everything that you could ask for. He talks trash, then he backs it up. I wouldn't be shocked if Demo made this list next year. And Brock Purdy. I mean, listen, Brock Purdy can play efficient enough football where when you're looking at a grade, a quarterback grade, he's going to be top 8 graded quarterback, probably. I mean, his EPA, the team's EPA always seems to be good. That's used as a quarterback stat now. His passer ratings and QBR is always good. Those things are always used. So I think Brock Purdy can be on this list as well. So we got Demo Purdy and Greenlaw if they sign him. Again, not even mentioning CMC or Brandon Ayuk, depending on when Brandon Ayuk comes back. So there's a lot of talent on the 49ers. A little bit disappointed in a 6-win season last year. Yes, I know they had a lot of injuries, but I really think that people don't understand just how talented the 49ers are. It's like when the 49ers have big time injuries. Yeah, it sucks. It sucks. But when you look at an injury list from the Arizona Cardinals, for example, or the Washington Commanders, those players aren't jumping out of the screen at you. You're not going, oh, they're missing a good player. No, those players are just starters. But remember, the starting point for the talent on that roster was so much lower that losing a starter who you may not know is extremely important to a team like that. And that's what's frustrating about last season is I just feel like there were way too many excuses made as to why the 49ers didn't make the playoffs. Oh, it's injuries. And a lot of teams dealt with injuries. The Lions dealt with more injuries. They made the playoffs. Now, much like the 49ers, as we see, a lot of talent on this team, maybe even more on the Lions. All right. But they didn't just make the playoffs. They made it as the number one overall seed. Now they got bounced. They got bounced brutally, but they were still there. And the fact that the 49ers couldn't even give it a fight the final 3 weeks, basically, of the season, that was pretty disappointing. But it's encouraging for next year, knowing that they've got another draft ahead of them. They've got players that I think we would all agree could make this list next year on top of the players that already made it. I think all those guys can repeat next year. They could have 8 to 10 guys on this list easily next year. There's still plenty of talent on this team, and that's encouraging for this upcoming year. You add in that Robert Saleh is going to be coaching the defense. Kyle Shanahan has trust for Robert Saleh. He can go do his own thing on offense. There's really no excuses. And with an easy schedule, the 49ers should be able to do a lot of damage this next year. A lot of damage. So some food for thought there. All right, let's get to some business that's been happening around the San Francisco 49ers. Tim Kawakami came out and actually let's skip that. I'll get back to that. We'll end on the Tim Kawakami report. Jeremy Fowler first, he came out and said that there are teams expressing interest in trading for Deebo Samuel. And that there have been preliminary discussions with Deebo's team and the 49ers about these potential trades. I'm curious to see multiple teams. I don't know which teams these are. I don't know if this is a smokescreen by the 49ers. I mean, think about it like this. If you're not getting any interest in a player that you know you're going to have to cut, and by all means, they're going to cut Deebo Samuel if he's not traded. He's got a major cash bonus owed to him, like March 18th or something like that. They're going to get rid of Deebo Samuel one way or another. And the rest of the league knows this. So if nobody's interested in this player, the best way to drum up interest is to act as if there are multiple teams interested. So this could be a true report. This very much could be true. There could be multiple teams interested in Deebo Samuel. But there is a scenario where I believe that nobody is interested in trading for Deebo, knowing that he's going to be a free agent anyways. They can rework the contract to fit their needs, not have to give up any assets, and not be locked into a contract that is already in place and have to work around that. And if no team's interested, well, the 49ers can certainly drum up interest by saying that teams are interested. So this report doesn't shock me. Is it true? Is it not? I don't know. We'll see if Deebo actually gets traded, but I do find it interesting that report came out over the last 24 or so hours. Speaking of Deebo Samuel, He's also a part of this other report from Tim Kawakami. This one interests me a lot more, and I think this is a great topic to end on for the night. Tim Kawakami came out and basically said in so many words that the 49ers regret the way that the Bosa contract played out, the Debo contract, the Ayuk contract. They essentially regret signing all those guys. They feel like they overpaid in each one of those cases. Now, we know the front office also came out a couple weeks ago. It was reported by Kawakami that, you know, they wanted to trade Debo and or Ayuk last offseason, but Kyle Shanahan didn't want to. And so eventually he won and those guys stayed. And this offseason, the reason that Debo's gone is because they're basically tired of it. They're moving on from Debo, regardless of what Shanahan says at this point. I find this report and the timing of it extremely interesting. Why? Why would this come out now? And the only thing I can think of is that they're in the middle of negotiations with Brock Purdy. Are they trying to send some sort of message to Brock Purdy that we're not going to budge anymore? We're tired of budging. We're not going to regret this contract. Is that the message they're trying to send at this moment? I highly doubt they're trying to send a message to George Kittle, who they're trying to restructure his contract, or Fred Warner, who they potentially might restructure his contract. So this message is meant for one of or two people, maybe both of them potentially. It's either meant for Brock Purdy and his agent, and saying that our offer is going to be our offer, don't play with us, or it's meant for Kyle Shanahan and potentially both. Because if it's meant for Kyle Shanahan, then they're basically saying, don't come to us last minute if we don't sign or extend a player on this roster that you want. We're not doing that anymore. We wasted our money on Bosa. Not that he's a bad player. I talked about how good of a player he is. They needed to sign Bosa. But to the extent in which they signed him, the price tag that they signed him, I mean, he's still the highest paid defensive player in the league, and he's like a top 15. If he were a quarterback, he'd be a top 15 paid quarterback, something like that. 15, 17, upper half of the league, basically, as a quarterback. And he's a defensive end. And he got so much more money than the guys behind him. It was a complete market reset by a pretty wide margin, and it still hasn't been surpassed 2 off seasons later. It's kind of crazy. So they probably feel like they overspent a little bit, on top of he missed all of training camp, it drug out. He didn't perform at his top level that first season back in 2023. And then Debo Samuel paid him big time money. He's never looked the same. They basically paid him for production that had already happened, not for production that was going to happen. And then Brandon Ayuk, unfortunate injury for sure. But sounds like the 49ers were ready to trade him, and then Kyle Shanahan didn't want that to happen, and so they kept him. Last offseason, they were ready to move on from Debo. Kyle Shanahan didn't want that to happen, so they kept him. So I could easily see a scenario where this leaked report is for Kyle Shanahan, just letting him know we're not doing that anymore. It's not the way this team's ran. We're going back to Parag running the contracts, playing hardball with these players. They can take it or leave it. Or the message is for Brock Purdy and his agent. And what I find interesting about this is that Brock Purdy's agent, for those of you that don't know, has been in the DMs of a lot of content creators. A lot of content creators. Basically saying, we're not taking a team-friendly deal. I know a content creator that put out on X saying, The 49ers, this was like 2 months ago. The 49ers should offer the Baker Mayfield deal to Brock Purdy. His agent went into that guy's DMs and said, "Oh, we're not accepting that. We're looking to get closer to Dak money." Okay. Well, if that's the conversation you've had with the 49ers, and now this report leaks, maybe the message is meant for his agent. Maybe not. Maybe it's just meant for Kyle Shanahan. Maybe it's meant for both. I don't know. But these things don't come out from again when Matt Mayoka reports it, Tim Kawakami reports it, Mike Silver reports it. Not that other people haven't reported things that are accurate. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is when those three report it, it is often directly from the team in one way or another. There's a reason that those things are put out into the ether. And it's not just oh man, by the way, I just was hanging out and forgot to tell you the 49ers are a little frustrated with the way these contracts have gone. No, the message is meant for somebody. Who the message is meant for, I don't know. I guess we'll find out in time. We'll see what the Brock Purdy contract ends up being. We'll see if Debo Samuel is off this team, and we'll see how future big time contracts go. Guys that we know that Kyle Shanahan absolutely loves. Do they get to stay when the team potentially might want to move on from them? I don't know. These things are going to get pretty interesting. So that's what I got for tonight. I hope you have a blessed weekend. I will be back next Thursday, but 49ers Daily goes all week long through the weekday. You got Wayne Breezy, you got Stats. Those guys are going to keep you covered Monday through Wednesday, and then I'll be back on Thursday and Friday to round out the week. Thank you so much for hanging out. And until next week, peace.